I'm Liz Johnson. I'm 23 years old, and in 2008 I won this gold medal at the Paralympic Games in Beijing.
Elizabeth Johnson just in front, they go to the wall, it's desperately close, and getting it is Johnson, 141.87.
I'm only who I am because of everything that's happened and the way that I've responded and the opportunities that have opened up and the lessons I've learned. I say that swimming massively impacted my life in terms of it used to influence every decision I made and every choice that I was faced with.
What a race. Elizabeth Johnson of Great Britain, she was the world record holder, she was the favourite.
I guess we learned to control the controllables. And so whenever I was faced with a decision, I would look at how my swimming was going to respond to that. A society exists on this idea that there's an ideal person and an ideal way to be. So in that sense, you have a disability because you're not that, basically, right? So you're fighting that ableism concept that the ideal person exists.
I'm so excited to have you here, Liz. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Could you start off by kindly telling the audience a little bit about you?
Yeah, for sure. Though I think you stole my headline of my intro. So, but yeah, I guess I've been fortunate in some respects to live a life where opportunity has arisen, sometimes because of my disability, sometimes in spite of it. I think I'd be naive to think that like it wasn't all without some hard work, but like you always need a little bit of luck. So yeah, I swam for 20 years pretty much in the para swimming program and setup, and I was fortunate to go to 3 Paralympics. As you mentioned, I won gold in Beijing in 2008. I went to Athens in 2004 and then London in 2012 at home, which was amazing, and got a medal at each. So that was also nice. And I think the experience I had as an athlete massively helped me then transition into, I want to say, the big, bad, wide world. I guess, like I said, like because it wasn't always easy. I wasn't naturally the best swimmer on the planet, but I worked hard, and I guess I learned to take feedback, and I learned that actually the things that inspire you or what get you out of bed in the morning. And also I think it helped me realize that when I transitioned out of sport, I wanted to be involved with something that ignited that passion in the same way, but maybe in a different field, which is exactly how I ended up where I am now, working at the Ability People, I guess.
And so I know you're broadcasting from Brazil right now. So how does someone born in Newport, South Wales, end up in Brazil? And tell us a little bit about your journey in life.
Well, I think I say that swimming massively impacted my life in terms of it used to influence every decision I made and every choice that I was faced with based on how my swimming would be impacted. Because, as I mentioned, I wasn't the most naturally gifted swimmer, but I had all the attributes it took to be an athlete. And I used to always, I guess we learned to control the controllables. And so whenever I was faced with a decision, I would look at how my swimming was going to respond to that, how it was going to be impacted, and I would make my choice on that basis. But similarly, it then influenced my friendship groups and where I got to travel and the other opportunities that opened up. And I'm not sure if he would be happy if I referred to him as an opportunity, but essentially I met my husband swimming, and he swims from Brazil. And so that's how I've ended up here, because he still competes. So obviously with Tokyo 2020 now won, hopefully happening this summer, his schedule is less flexible than mine. So that's brought me to Brazil rather than him coming to Britain. So yeah, that's why I'm here. And I think that basically is a good summary of how my whole life's gone. Like, I think I've always been faced with opportunities and choices to make, and I've made them based on what's the most time sensitive or what's going to make the biggest impact at the time. And actually it stood me in pretty good stead, because I would say I was probably quite risk averse, and I'd always worry about if I did something and it didn't work out. Whereas having a focus, whatever that focus is at the time in your life, to help you make those decisions and give you direction, I think took that burden away from me a little bit about worrying about if it didn't work out, because I'd make the choice, I'd commit to it and just see where it took me.
That's a really interesting point. I hope the listeners pick up on this concept of, if you have a focus, in a way it helps you embrace risk, right? And I guess a bit like swimming, you probably have a destination, right? You know what you're meant to do, and hopefully in a certain amount of time, right? So having that focus really helps. But how did you transition from, looking at your CV, you've done so many amazing things, of course, television reporter, worked in trusts, of course, worked in the Paralympic Swimming Championship Network. But how did you move into the Ability People Project? And what is the Ability People Project for the listeners that don't know it?
So I think, as I said, like swimming used to give me opportunity and it used to drive a lot of the decisions I made, but avenues opened up. And I think that's one thing I took from my childhood and my life generally, is there's a lot in this world you can't control, but there's something quite powerful about feeling enabled. And when you own a decision, even if it turns out to be a good one or a bad one, the empowering part is you made that choice. And so one thing my parents used to always say to me is, you can swim for as long as you like and we'll support you. But remember, like, it doesn't define you and it could go wrong at any time. And like, they were trying to keep my feet on the ground, right? Because I was a teenager doing something I absolutely loved, and like fortunate to get funded for it. So it was better than, like, for me, it was way better than going to work in the shop on a Saturday or in the bank after school, which a lot of my friends did. I was doing something I loved, and it was funding my lifestyle. And like, so gradually, but similarly, I was aware that you're only as good as your next swim, and there's only so much you can do. Like, you can swim faster than you've ever swum before, but if someone swims even quicker, then you don't win. So you have to have tangible goals and tangible results and things that will impact you and will reflect upon you, regardless of an external outcome that you can't control. And so that meant that I kept up my education, I think, was one of the biggest things. And I let swimming govern that too. I chose my subjects. I got rid of everything I didn't like, saw what was left on the list, and then I worked out what would fit best into the timetable that could allow me to swim. And so I chose those subjects. And when my dad more so than my mum, was asking me what I wanted to do when I was older, I was like, oh, well, I like maths and I like money, so I'll be an accountant. So I pursued a business management degree and I specialized in finance. And so that meant then that a lot of opportunities opened up alongside my swimming, because there were some sponsorship opportunities with corporate organizations that realized that actually it was more than being an athlete. It's about what you're going to do later in life and actually helping you evolve as an individual. So that kept me in that corporate world and kept me in that understanding of potential opportunities post being an athlete, which I think was really helpful and really beneficial. But ultimately, I ended up where I am with the Ability People, because when I did retire, I appreciated how fortunate I'd been as a person with a disability to have a career that I was skilled in, but also I enjoyed and I loved and I had choice. And actually, my attention was drawn to the fact that people with disabilities, the employment gap for them, so the difference between the amount of people with disability in employment and those who don't have disabilities in employment was huge. And it had stood at over 30% for over a decade. And I was like, well, why is this? And like, a lot of my life has been like a combination of things happening all at the same time that have led me down a path. And at that point, I was like, I was broadcasting, as I still am, like mostly in sport, but like looking at opportunities for other things. And I was like, is it like, why is this? Is there a program on this, or is it something bigger? And as I delved deeper, I just realized that there was just such a massive gap in people's understanding of what disability actually is and what it represents. And so it was affecting people's ability to access employment opportunities based on a number of reasons. And I wanted to try and do my bit to fix it. I mean, I know you can't change the world in a day, but you can change someone's world. And actually, I felt like I was in a privileged position to have the platform that being an athlete and being a Paralympic champion had given me. So it would have been reckless of me to ignore that. And it kept me then involved in something I was passionate about, like positive change and education and increasing exposure. And it just so happened that everything came together with co-founder Steve Carter, an event I was speaking at, and we got talking afterwards. And he had a similar frustration to me about the idea of the lack of people with disabilities and diversity within talent pools, but he was coming at it from the angle that he's a recruiter and he's been a recruiter for over 30 years. And he's like, these people must exist. They do exist in the world. So why do they never come through the process to get these jobs? So then we sat down and we looked at it, and I gave him my take on it, and he explained to me the recruitment processes and how they work. And so I highlighted where the barriers were. And so we decided that we wanted to create more meaningful employment opportunities for those with disabilities, but actually it leads to authentic inclusion for all. And so by setting up the Ability People, or TAP as we affectionately call it, we created a working environment where we removed all unnecessary barriers. So everyone in our team has a disability or an impairment or a medical condition of some kind. That means that they don't necessarily prefer to work in conventional working environments. It doesn't mean they couldn't. Some of them couldn't, but some of them could, but it doesn't benefit their overall lifestyle to do so. And then we'll help them work in that environment, but then also provide consultancy to organizations to normalize those differences, to humanize interactions, to dispel myths around what disability actually is and what it represents, and actually bring the corporate world into 2021. So that's what the Ability People does now, and it does largely end up focusing with organizations, helping them around their recruitment processes and their attraction. But actually, a lot of the time, it's about reframing their current processes, resetting their current ideas, so that they realize that actually there's probably a lot of people with disabilities already working within their organizations, but maybe not being able to reach their full potential because they're trying to fit into a system that isn't designed for them. So that's what we do.
That's fascinating, and I guess I'm trying to understand it, and because I think it's interesting, diversity as a word. I don't, for some reason, people with abilities, I never really thought about it in that context. Of course, my wife is Chinese, my son is half Chinese, and I'm always worried about a future in places like the UK where maybe he won't be included in some things because he's perceived as Chinese. So that diversity concept is very much front of my mind. But I guess the disability element of it, I'd never really conceptualized it before in my head. And I guess how do you go about making a corporation more accessible, I guess, or more available to understand this problem and adjust their systems, which are often set in stone, right? How do you bring them about? How do you get them to understand it?
I think the point you make about being very aware of things that relate to you or impact someone that you're close to or within your social circle or your environment is a very poignant point to make. And actually, that's the reality, right? A lot of the time, we're oblivious to difference because we've never experienced it. So the number one thing that we do at the Ability People is expose people to those differences and make them comfortable with them. Because actually, and I think that's a large strength in what we do, is, like I said, everybody in the team has an impairment of some kind. But actually, we're all human. And actually, a lot of people have never been able to access individuals who are not like them before. And disability is one of the most misunderstood demographics because we react to visual stimulus, right? So like you said, like with your son, people would look at him and they would see that he is slightly different, and they would make an assumption based on that. And when it comes to disability, a lot of the same happens. So people see a person who they assume or perceive to have a disability, and they jump to an assumption about what that person is capable of or what that is going to mean for them as an individual who doesn't have a disability to fix, in inverted commas, to enable the person with a disability. But actually, that's not necessary. People don't want you to do things for them. They just want to have an equal opportunity to access So it's not about being treated equally and treated the same, but it's having the equitable experience. So it, like the same opportunity to be successful. And that's why I think the way we do it at the Ability People, which is slightly different to the majority of people that deal with disability inclusion, is that we talk about the real issues and we make ourselves available for questions that are dark and deep sometimes, but that really play on people's mind, but actually help re-educate the learning that people have had for over 50 years. So we personify what we are trying to encourage people to do, and because people find it difficult to believe in something they can't see, which again is why disability demographic is always treated so differently and is so far behind in its advancements and its movements in the sense of the way people perceive them. It's because if you think about the media, or you think about movies, or you think about life generally and the way people are portrayed if they have a disability, it's either that they are superhuman or that they are in need receipt of charity or pity or assistance. And so we need to reframe that and change the narrative, because actually 70% of people with disabilities have invisible disabilities. So if you're waiting for that visual stimulus in order to act and help them, then you're never going to get that. But actually, and we say, if you focus on purely diversity, all that does is to change the way things look. That doesn't necessarily change the way things happen or the way people think. But if you look at authentic inclusion and you remove remove all the unnecessary barriers, then everyone benefits. So it isn't just people with a disability that would benefit, but people who have different home commitments, or people who look different for whatever reason, or people who have different educational backgrounds. If you create an environment where people can present their best self and show you what they're capable of, then what that does, that's when the playing field gets leveled. That's when you end up hiring the best talent. And that's when you end up being the most productive as an organization. Did that make sense?
It makes total sense. And I'm learning while I'm listening about this, because it's not a subject, as you say, I've been exposed to. So I find it fascinating, and I love educating myself about this. But I also like your name, the Ability People. I feel like it's almost... the word disability kind of puts people at a disadvantage, doesn't it? It's actually perhaps the wrong word. I sometimes use the analogy for myself. I have dyslexia. And so when I was young, it was a big problem. I was teased a lot about it. Teachers thought I was stupid. It turns out it's actually my superpower, because the way I learned to hack it, I didn't read a book. I couldn't read a book. So what I used to do when I had to submit a book report is I'd ask the 30 people in my class who'd all read that book. I interviewed them. What was your view on that book? And then I'd have 30 different views on the same book. And then I'd dictate to my mum actually an essay around that concept. I've actually got 30 different points of view instead of just the one from reading it myself. So turning that disability into a superpower is kind of what I'm hearing from you.
Yeah, it's about the way that disability is viewed in society and the misunderstanding about what that represents. And it's exactly right. It's an unfortunate word in the sense that the dis comes at the beginning, but actually it reflects on the way that society is. And so society exists on this idea that there's an ideal person and an ideal way to be. So in that sense, you have a disability because you're not that, basically, right? So you're fighting that ableism concept that the ideal person exists. But the biggest misconception is from the difference between disability and being disabled. And so I always say, I have a disability. I'm okay with that. It's cerebral palsy, right? And again, like you said, people viewed it differently, dyslexia, and they shouldn't, because again, it's a disability. It's okay. And it's okay to have a disability because it doesn't define you. The problem comes that when people don't understand that and they assume that it means you are less capable. And you are no less capable of achieving an objective just because you do it differently. And that's where the reframing and the understanding needs to change around disability. And like I quite often say, I have cerebral palsy. Like I said, I don't wake up some days and it's not there and other days it is. I live with it. It's there all the time. It's a part of who I am, but it doesn't prevent me doing things. It prevents me doing them like other people do them, but it doesn't prevent me doing them. And I think that's what we have to be understanding of. And that's what we also have to be okay to be taught about, because a lot of the time, like you said, generations before us, people with disabilities, I mean, initially it was any disability. And then over time, it's been like they've changed the way some exposure to disability changes and that gets understood, but other people are still treated. So rather than trying to support you with your dyslexia at school and figure out a way for you to communicate that essay that isn't like everybody else, but still gets the essay written. So for now, for example, you might do a voice note, or you might use voice to text, or like you said, you might get someone to scribe for you, whatever. That the outcome's the same. You still submit the content that was in your brain. But in the education system, and especially generations ago, there was only a one-size-fits-all policy. And if you didn't fit into that, then you didn't survive, or you didn't thrive. You might survive, but you didn't thrive. And I think the education system has definitely got better at that and become more open to it. But the problem in the workplace is a lot of the people who are in positions for hiring or positions for making decisions have that experience of what it meant to be to have a disability. And yes, you then became disabled, but not because of your dyslexia, or in my case, my cerebral palsy, but because of the processes that were in place that prevented you from reaching your potential and showing you what you were capable of. And actually, again, you can't expect people to know the answers to that or even be aware of it, because if it's never affected them. But ignorance is not an excuse. And like we all have biases, and we all have unconscious biases. And like you're never going to get to a world where we don't have them. Like I always say, I'm a Liverpool fan, right? So whenever I meet a Man United fan, like I instantly make a decision about them. And some of my best friends are Man United fans. But the point is, I make a decision. That's bias, right? It's got nothing to do with my disability. Like that's football. But it exists. And it doesn't matter that I have it, but it matters if I'm not aware of it and I don't check it and make sure that it's not impacting decisions I make or interactions I have or actions that I perform to disadvantage another individual. That's what a lot of what we do at the Ability People is reframe that thinking. That disability is not a bad word, and it doesn't mean I'm weaker. It just means I'm different.
I think, but this does creep into diversity as a subject as well. I mean, I just think about my own childhood. I didn't realize that my own mother was racist until I was much older, you know, and it's funny how you do grow up with whatever your environment dictates to you is what's normal and what's not normal, right? So, and I guess the point I'm making here is that, you know, what you're saying there really resonates with me, and you are definitely affected by what is happening to you in your life. And what you're saying there, which I think is important for people to do, is get exposed to these other pockets of life and normalize what you perceive as abnormal and see it's just, you know, one more unique human being, right? With their own unique strengths and weaknesses, which we all have, right? There's no perfect human being. So it's fascinating. But I wanted to go back to your childhood, I guess, for a second, just to understand, you know, your journey. From what I was reading about you started swimming at 4 years old. Was this something that naturally happened, or was this something your parents said? And at that age, you know, you were diagnosed with cerebral palsy, right? So was it a factor in the process? Were your parents worried? Did they have this unconscious bias towards it?
So I was diagnosed with my cerebral palsy when I was 6 months old, and actually, it's very early, and I think largely my cousin is exactly a month older than me, and my mum was a teacher, so she had that awareness, I guess, of child development, and she had a direct comparison. So she picked up very early that I did things differently even as a baby. Like I started to reach for things with my dominant hand, and I favored that hand, and if I fell to one side, then even when I was crawling and so I couldn't get back up, and all those things. So I was very fortunate to get my diagnosis early, especially back then. And I think I've got a lot to be grateful for, and the biggest thing, and I think as I get older, I have an even bigger appreciation for it, is just how strong my mum must have been to put me in situations where yet to watch me And like, so I don't use struggle in a term. I don't always struggle. Life is not one big struggle. But when I'm trying to do things like everybody else is in a timely fashion with only the equipment that they've got available to them, then yes, sometimes it is more difficult, it is more challenging. And like I find now when I take my friends' children somewhere, if I see them like having difficulty climbing up the ladder to the slide or something, I want to go and help them. So it must have been heart-wrenching, and she was so strong to put me in situations. And I think she used to she'd do enough preparation to know that it was a controlled environment for me to figure things out. Like, so she didn't wrap me in cotton wool. She made sure I had all the opportunities that my other friends and peers had at every age, but she also made sure that it was a secure enough environment that I wasn't going to be traumatized by my experience. And ultimately, I learned to swim at 4 years old because that's what everyone did. Like, and we live on an island. I mean, but also I live by a canal, and we were fortunate. Like both my parents worked, so we used to go on holidays, and I think they wanted to be able to enjoy their summer holiday and not worry about their child drowning in the pool. But I think the other thing is that my mum was very good at was saying, look, you're not going to do it like everybody else. But it doesn't matter. So me and my mum, we had this thing where we never focused on, she would always introduce a new activity to me and tell me what the objective was and then let me figure it out. And she would support me with that. So when I was learning to tie my laces, for example, she didn't teach me to tie my laces like she did or show me an able-bodied peer tying their laces. She said, right, these are the laces. And this is how they've got to end up. So how are we going to do it? And she saw my instinct. She used to let me go with my instinct. And then she would go, do you reckon this would make it easier? And we trial and error a lot of the time. But ultimately, I think from very early on, she realized we weren't going to be doing things like everyone else. But it didn't mean we couldn't get to the same end point. And for that, I'll be eternally grateful. And I'm definitely of the mindset that she sacrificed a lot more of her emotions, and it must have been heart-wrenching for her. But as a result, I'm an independent, successful adult that I maybe wouldn't have been if it hadn't have been for her approach to that.
Wow. I'm sending love to your mum right now. I think that's
me too, beaming it.
And respect. As someone with a 3.5-year-old, he climbs a wall. I'm literally holding his hand, and the wall isn't that high, like a foot high, and I'm like, don't fall. So it takes a very brave parent to kind of do that. And it fascinates me just understanding. You said earlier that you were able to make a living doing what you love, which I think is a dream for a lot of my listeners. And so I have to say again, this is more like a job, maybe misconception, but in my mind, there isn't much money being a Paralympic swimmer. So how did that play out? I mean, I do see athletes as entrepreneurs in my mind. They end up often having to get brand endorsements, get an agent, whatever. But how did you actually make it sustainable for yourself? How does that work as a business?
I think the reality is you're absolutely right. It's not, and depending on the sport, obviously, and there's some sports that end up actually becoming more entertainment and the price tag goes with that. So baseball, football, basketball, those kinds of sports. But like a lot of professional sports, people and athletes do end up in very typical jobs after they finished. But I think for me, it was at the time, what I was getting out of it was worth it for me. So I was getting funded. And whilst so when I graduated in 2007 and my friends, I was then going to train for Beijing and my friends were going into graduate programs. At that time, what I was receiving funding wise was the same as what they were receiving in their new roles. And I was okay with that. I mean, I guess the flip of it is if I swam badly or if somebody beat me or something happened and I couldn't swim anymore, then that money stopped, right? There's no longevity in it. There's no financial security in terms of pension or anything like that. But at the time I was like, actually, this is helping me do what I want to do. I'm happy doing what I do. And I was fortunate, like I said, to get some corporate sponsors. So EDF Energy sponsored me and BT sponsored me. And I think so, again, that helped me. And I was just, like I said, I had a business degree and I made, for me, what was sensible decisions at the time. So like I bought a house, I didn't rent a house. So instead of paying rent, I was paying my mortgage. So whilst the same money was going out, eventually I was investing in it for me. And so I never felt like in that sense that my peers that weren't athletes were running away down that professional path at a greater rate than I was. And again, I'll say I was really fortunate, like life's about opportunity, and I'm really fortunate I was born at the right time, because I think like I hit para sport just at the right time. Like when I was deciding I wanted to be a Paralympian, I was meeting people who were inspiring me to do that. The Paralympics wasn't on the TV, like nobody knew what it was, and there was no money in it, and lottery funding had just started, but there was no major sponsorship involved or anything like that. But as I grew up through para swimming as the Paralympic movement was growing as well. And so the timing in that sense could not have been better. So you have to be a bit realistic about these things. And similarly, when I retired and transitioned into sports broadcasting, well, that was the right time too, because if I tried to do that 20 years ago, the Paralympics wasn't on the TV, and therefore there would have been no job to have. And similarly, even doing what I'm doing with the ability people, if I tried to do that 30 years ago, people would have thought I was crazy. I mean, they still think I'm a bit crazy, but like my passion overtakes the fact that people think I'm crazy, so I'm okay with that. But like, so I think it's balance is the short answer to what you're saying. And you can do it two ways. You can either swim and think, yeah, I'm getting funded to do for this lifestyle and spend every penny you've got and then leave with nothing, or you can be a bit savvier, because I always wanted to finish on my terms as well. So I never wanted to be the fact that I didn't make a time for funding, or I didn't make a team and I was going to stop. I wanted to finish when it was no longer the most important thing to me, or when I had other things that I'd like to focus on. And so as a result, I was like, well, actually, you need to make sure you've got enough money to enable you to do that moving forward. Like you never want to swim because they're paying you to swim, because as soon as you have to, it wasn't easy getting up at 4:37 in the morning, but it was worth it because I was doing what I wanted to do. But as soon, I swam with so many people that used to be like me and loved it, but then were at the end of their career and they were getting out of bed because it was paying their mortgage or paying their bills. And I never wanted to be in that position where I lost that love of it, but also the freedom to make my own choices based on if I didn't, they would take my funding off me. So I think it was balance and the idea of being financially independent. Very important.
How did you keep that balance? Because again, I'm thinking about my listeners, the parallel to being an athlete and being an entrepreneur to me is very similar. You know, there's a lot of people that dream of being self-employed, and they go off and become self-employed, and then they get trapped or hate their own business, and they feel they've got to keep it going because it pays the bills, but they don't enjoy it, don't love it. How did you keep the love of it? When you say balance, what is that exactly? How did you do that?
So I think in terms of balance, it's about understanding that sometimes less is more, and actually you've got to do what prepares you to be the best, your best version of your best self at any given time. So if you burn out or you overcommit or you're not happy and you're not remembering why you're doing, you're not getting that enjoyment, then you can't bring that same level of passion to what you're doing. So, and I think it's hard because especially as an entrepreneur, 9 times out of 10, you're working on your baby. It was your idea. Nobody knows it better than you in the beginning. It's in your head and you're trying to get it out there. And then, but over time, you need to get other people in your network to support you. And whether that's in your actual organization and you delegate some opportunities and some roles, or that you just have a backroom staff and not even linked to the organization, but just in your team at home or in your friendship group that you can vent to and you can bounce ideas off so you don't feel like you're carrying the burden. I would say, and like I said, I learned that through swimming initially as an athlete, and I definitely carried that into being an entrepreneur and setting up the ability field. But similarly, I massively at one point fell foul to do it, and I was literally spinning 100 plates, and the thing that was neglected was me and my time at home. I guess. But then for me, that was one positive to come out of the pandemic, was it forced me to slow down. It forced me to stop, and it forced me to reevaluate what was happening, and reminded me what I loved about being at home and working out a way to make more of that happen, but without completely abandoning what I already do. So I think, that in terms of balance and in terms of the transition and in terms of the similar skills, it's that ability to have self-awareness, but also be able to reflect periodically to make sure that what was getting you up in the morning originally is still what's making you tick now. And if it isn't, that's okay, but finding another way to reignite that passion.
Is the Ability People business a for-profit business?
Yes. So the Ability People is for profit, which again was very important to us and everyone that's involved with it, because one of the when we were doing our research and when we were looking to things, one of the things we realized was a lot of the time, a lot of things and organizations associated to helping people with disabilities are charities, which is vital. You need charities, but then the knock-on effect that has is that a lot of then organizations or people think that by helping a person with disability, you're giving them charity or they need charity. And we wanted to break that and realize that actually, no, it should be a conscious decision. And actually it should be for profit, because this knowledge that you're gaining, these skills that you're gaining are an investment into your organization to improve the productivity, to improve the bottom line, to improve the well-being of your staff. So it is an investment. And actually it's also a reality that people value things that they have to pay for, even if they don't have to pay much for them, but they value it more if they feel like they've had to earn it, so to speak.
I think it's a very interesting thing too. A lot of people want to build purposeful businesses like you have, that do good, but somehow the concept of profit is seen as what's the word? I want to say evil, but that's too dark. I think people perceive the businesses that do good shouldn't necessarily make money, which is wrong. I agree with you completely. I think actually you need to have the best people in those organizations, so you need to pay them properly, right? You need to be able to hire the very best talent to solve the biggest problems. I recently interviewed someone I really respect, a guy called Jeff, who's running a homeless charity, and he said it best. He's like, I don't know why these charities even are perceived that they can't pay people properly. It's almost they're doing something wrong if they're paying people properly. It shouldn't be that way around. It should be the companies that are doing, he was highlighting finance companies that make a lot of money out of doing bad things. They shouldn't get the most amount of money. It should be flipped on its head. Right, it should actually be the people doing the most good should be the best paid, and there should be a direct correlation to the two. So I like the model. Is it a B Corp model? Is the other one I find interesting. Where it's about the bottom. It's not measured by profit alone. It's measured by the impact you have. Right. So, what is success for you today? How do you measure success as an organization, as a person?
So obviously, as an organization, our success is all around our ability to normalize difference and the impact if we've changed perceptions and increased exposure and created more meaningful employment opportunities. And the key is meaningful, like you said. So it's not just someone in a job to tick a box or to look like the impact is affected, but actually to change the entire organization. That's success in a business then. But actually, for me personally, I think it's been a theme that's run through our whole chat, but I realized that actually happiness is success. So if you can have all of the extrinsic things going on, you can have physical, you can be earning a certain amount of money, or you can have a certain sized house, or you can have a certain look family or whatever, or live in a certain place or travel a certain amount of time, whatever. But ultimately, if you've got all that and you're not happy, then are you truly successful? And I think the answer for me is no. I think so. I think happy is a bit cheesy, but I think happiness is the biggest measure of your success. And I think, again, you're right, the idea around having a positive impact on something or somebody is a feel-good factor. It does create happiness, but it shouldn't be instead of. It's not mutually exclusive to an organization still making profit. And actually, if you're going to do it for the right reasons. There are plenty of people out there who have the skill sets that you need that can still fit the mold, but also make a positive impact on social circumstances or on the environment. And actually, again, that's why it's important that some organizations are for profit, because you have to change that narrative around it's an either or. It's not an either or. And actually, if you're truly inclusive, you'll get diversity as a byproduct. And as a result, you will end up with a more competitive organization.
Completely agree. And I love the message. Do you think that going forward, the business model that you're running now, the question I'm thinking about is like, how do you get a business like yours off the ground? How did you make it happen? Again, a lot of my listeners wonder, I want to start a business, and they might be listening to you right now feeling like, wow, I want to do something purposeful. They've got something they care about that they think they can fix in the world. How did you go about getting this project off the ground? What was the process?
I think firstly, you've got to identify the issue that you're trying to tackle, and realistically look at the barriers to it, and then remove any unnecessary barriers and create the right team. So don't fill your support network or even your team within the organization with people who are saying the right thing. Like, get a feel of their actions, let their actions speak, and make sure that you're all united in the overall objective and the overall goal. I think for me, that was the biggest thing in terms of setting it up and getting it fundamental, organically grow, is because we don't forget that. Like, don't forget why you set it up and what the issue is that you're trying to tackle. And it's really hard as an entrepreneur or as a startup because especially if you're collaborating with people who come from different walks of life to you, you've all got different ways of doing things. But if you're united over the overall objective, then you'll always end up in the right place, and stay true to yourself. So don't bend over and say yes to people or do things because it's the only way you're going to get that deal. Be prepared to not get that deal if it's not in line with what you're trying to achieve, or it doesn't support what you're trying to change. I think that for me is the most important thing, is remain authentic. Take feedback, like have an open mind, but remain authentic to what you've committed to and the way that you operate.
It kind of, the message, it reminds me of the same point you're making around the athletic enjoyment, basically going back to that original core reason you're there. That's what sustains you. Right? What was your reason for wanting to be a successful swimmer? Every time you felt tired or you felt, what was your reset?
I think it was a couple of things. Firstly, I'm super competitive and I wanted to be the best swimmer that I could be. And ultimately, I wanted to win a gold medal. But I also think I lost a few times and I missed teams and I realized it sucked. And like, I wanted to always stand behind the block, knowing that I'd done everything I could to give myself the best chance, because I couldn't control the result, right? I could only do my best on any given day. But if I knew I'd done everything I could, then I would learn to live with the result and I could reflect upon it and I could grow from it. Whereas if I hadn't and I still lost, then I would always be thinking, what if? Or I'd be blaming myself, or I might thinking there was more I could have done. So I think for me, it was that idea of preparing myself the best I could to give myself the best chance to win. That was ultimately it. So I guess often it was my disappointments that fueled my ambition going forward. I
think that's also a good parallel back to entrepreneur life too, because I think we always say in startup world, it's good to fail, which a lot of people don't understand. Why would it be good to fail? But what you're talking about, it's good to lose. It's good to lose because you fight a little harder to make sure you don't lose next time. And you said it earlier, which I'm not sure is 100% true. But you said you were not the best swimmer. That's what you said. And I'm like, well, you must have been pretty good, but you weren't the best. And in a way that made you probably train a bit harder, that made you focus a little bit more, right? Which actually often is the edge, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it was like when I say I wasn't the best swimmer, obviously at one point I was the best swimmer.
Yeah, you were. You were literally the best swimmer in the world. Yeah, exactly. Literally. So when you said that earlier, I'm like, you were pretty good.
It's true. I maybe paraphrased. I guess what I meant was I wasn't the most naturally gifted swimmer. So like I don't have, like my husband, he can not swim for months, get in the water and he just cuts through the water. Like he's a natural swimmer and he's a good athlete, which makes him amazing. But for me, I wasn't, when I was younger, like I had a roommate and she'd always win and I would be lucky if I scraped a bronze, and it used to really frustrate me. But like you said, it made me work hard and it made me go back to the drawing board and it made me learn. So then when I got older and things leveled out a bit, I knew how to dig deep because I'd done it before. And I think that is important when you're an entrepreneur. It is important, like things won't go up. It's really difficult because in the beginning, if you get it off the ground, you're used to people going, oh my God, this is such an amazing idea. Oh gosh, like, yes, let's do this. And people are heaping the praise on you or can't do enough to support you. But then you hit a point where people start to see the cracks because it's not going to be a perfect plan, right? Because if it was perfect, you would have done it years ago or someone else would have done it. Mm-hmm. So like, but it's this idea, it's like reframing your thinking that feedback or criticism or like you said, mistakes or failure, if that's what you want to call it, isn't worthless. And actually it just makes you take a step back, reassess and see if you need to change direction or adjust anything so that when you get towards your objective, you've got the best product or the best service that could be, and you've already ironed out all the kinks. Like they're the people who end up being successful and having longevity in their idea. And like sometimes people get caught up, like do you want that quick fix, that quick gratification, or do you want to achieve your overall objective that you set out for? So I think, again, like I said, reframe that thinking that actually all feedback is good because it helps you improve. And again, like that idea of like more than one mind working on a problem. The whole point we talk about diversity and inclusion is so that we can see things from different angles and we can come up with the best solution. That's the reality. And again, that is underpinned by not forgetting why you started out doing what you're doing.
It's such a good message. If you were to do it all again, what would you do differently?
Interesting question. I people ask this question a lot and I try to think hard, but I'm like, ultimately, and again, this is a super cheesy answer, but I think like I'm only who I am because of everything that's happened and the way that I've responded and the opportunities that have opened up and the lessons I've learned. And like in an ideal world, I would say maybe that I learned that I didn't need to do everything like everybody else. I didn't need to be like everybody else. I would have learned that at a younger age. But I think I did. Like my mum was really open and honest with me. So even as an 8-year-old, when I was picking my musical instrument to learn at school, she was very frank with me. And she was like, you can choose the same as everyone else, but you won't be very good at it. Or we can find one that's going to enable you to be the best that you can potentially be. And then if you're not very good, it's because you weren't meant to do it, not because like your function is holding you back. So I learned that early on. And like in an ultimate ideal world, I would say, that I wouldn't particularly do anything differently, but my mum would still be alive or something like that. But actually, even all of those things, every single thing that's happened has led me to where I am now and given me the resolve that I've got and taught me the lessons. So actually, I think I wouldn't do anything differently, but I might let myself believe that everything's going to be okay.
Well, I've loved chatting to you today, and I am now conscious that we're coming up to an hour, and I know our listeners often listen to us while they're on a run or going swimming. Maybe we'll figure that one out. They can listen while they're swimming. But I do appreciate your time. I just want to end, I guess, with maybe one question. And I wanted to ask you, about luck and how you feel about luck. I mean, how do you perceive luck? Do you feel that you've been lucky, you've been unlucky, you've had lots of luck? Was there a particular moment as well in your life where you felt, wow, this was my lucky break?
I think in terms of luck, they say, don't they, you make your own luck, or the more you practice, the luckier you get. But actually, I think everyone needs a little bit of luck, and it depends what you perceive to be luck. Is it that you were in the right place at the right time? Is it that you had the courage to take the leap? I definitely appreciate circumstance with me, and I think if I'm talking about luck and how lucky I am, it's more a fortune, and I'm really fortunate, and call that luck if you want, to have the people in my life that I've got in my life, that I've had at various points in my life, that have supported me and enabled me to become the person that I am today.
Well, thank you for that. The reason I like to talk about luck sometimes is because a bit of what you just said there, perception of luck is an interesting thing. Like, I think I'm lucky to have dyslexia. Like, I think my life today is better because of what was perceived as a weakness when I was younger. So I like people that are out there working really hard, having watched that, listened to that Instagram quote, or read that Instagram quote, the harder you work, the luckier you get, and they haven't made it, and they're wondering why, right? So I think it is an element that's important, I think, to discuss amongst those that have been successful, that there is an element of luck playing a part in our lives, and maybe it's just a question of persistence, as you mentioned earlier, or resetting yourself and giving yourself the reason that you're here. Eventually your luck will click in if you remember why you're there, that type of, or appreciate why you're there. The actual luck is in the moment somehow. But I appreciate all of your insights today. It's been an absolute joy to have you on the podcast, and I really appreciate you taking time out to share with us. And I know you haven't even had lunch, so Go and have some lunch. And
still time.
We didn't hear your stomach grumble once. So those on Spotify or Apple Music, they haven't been disturbed by your stomach. So thank you so much for that, and I really appreciate you taking time out.
Thank you very much for having me.